You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, Syracuse football takes on number 19 Pitt on Thursday night at 7:30. Arguably the biggest matchup in the ACC this week. Syracuse, if they win this one, they can honestly establish themselves as a contender in the conference. If they lose, well, not that the whole season is over, but you're probably looking at, winning 8 games and making a nice bowl game, right? This is a big game for Syracuse football. Now, unfortunately, we hoped that they would get all ACC linebacker Marlowe Wax back from injury this week. According to Fran Brown, it's not going to happen. Marlowe Wax will not play this Thursday night against Pitt. For context, Marlowe Wax has been out with a lower body injury since the second half of the season opener against Ohio. And after the game, if you recall, I believe it was the Monday after the game, Fran Brown said that it was a 6-week timetable for Marlowe Wax. And we were hoping that with the 6-week timetable, if that was followed to a T, that Wax would be back for this game against Pitt. Unfortunately, that is not the case. The good news, however, regarding Marlowe Wax is that he should be back for the Virginia Tech game next Saturday, according to Fran Brown. So that's the good news. It should just be one more week without Marlowe Wax. I do also want to point out that I think it hurts Syracuse that they're playing on a Thursday night because, I don't know this for sure, but it wouldn't hurt if they were playing on Saturday to have Marlowe Wax at a couple extra days. So it hurts them for this week, but it does help for next week with Virginia Tech getting that extra few days. You see what I'm saying? Because it's kind of like another mini bye for Syracuse. They're not going to play, obviously, this weekend. They play on Thursday night. They're off for the rest of the weekend. Then they play on Saturday against Virginia Tech. So it should help Marlowe in that regard for returning, but it probably hurt for this week that they're playing on Thursday. I don't know that for sure, but it's just food for thought, right? So with Marlowe Wax not in the lineup once again for Syracuse, he has not played since the season opener. Obviously a tough loss. They're still 5-1 without him. What is the defense going to look like? Well, it's the same defensive lineup on the depth chart since the Holy Cross game. Before the Holy Cross game, there were massive lineup changes, which I documented on the podcast. You can go check it out after this one if you want more specifics behind it. But it's largely the same as what it was against Holy Cross, okay? Derek McDonald is going to be the starting middle linebacker for Syracuse football. He took over as the starting middle linebacker for the Holy Cross game. Before that, Derek McDonald was the starting weak side linebacker. They had James Hurd fill in as the middle linebacker, but they made the switch for Holy Cross. James Hurd is now the backup at middle linebacker, and they slightly changed Derek McDonald's position from weak side linebacker to overall middle linebacker. And since the switch, he's averaged about 7 tackles per game. He's been pretty solid at the position. Now, he will have his occasional missed tackle here or there. It happens, but at the end of the day, I think Derek McDonald has done a fine job as a middle linebacker for Syracuse football. He's graded out pretty nicely on Pro Football Focus since the switch. With that being said, who's your weak side linebacker? Well, since Holy Cross, and it remains the same for this game against Pitt, it's Justin Barron. Justin Barron made the switch from safety. He was an all-conference safety last season with one hand for almost half the year. For whatever reason, it just wasn't clicking the first few games of the season. I don't know what it was, but he has looked much better as a linebacker since the Holy Cross game. So that's good news for us, right? Devin Grant, for what it's worth, he is going to still be he's going to be the rover, right? He's taking over for Justin Barron's normal position as the rover. So the rover is the third safety on the field. That's where Devin Grant will be. This is really important now. Let's talk about Fadil Diggs, because it's not a change in the Syracuse lineup per se. If you look at the depth chart, Fadil Diggs is still listed as a starting defensive end. But as I have been saying on the podcast these past few episodes, Fadil Diggs is going to have to once again be a lot more than just a defensive end against Pitt. He's also going to have to be a linebacker. He's going to have to be a quarterback spy. It really hurts not to have Marlowe Wax for this game in particular because you're going up against a quarterback in Eli Holstein who not only can beat you with his arm, he can beat you with his legs. This is probably the best quarterback that Syracuse has faced so far this season. Now, Pat Narduzzi for Pitt said the same thing about Kyle McCord, that it's the best quarterback that Pitt has played in quite a while. These are two high-powered quarterbacks. They're going to need to rush the passer. And Fadil Diggs can't just pin his ears back the entire time at defensive end. He's going to also have to be a quarterback spy and play a little bit of linebacker as well. It worked for the Georgia Tech game, obviously. He did that. He's done that ever since the Marlowe Wax injury. It's nothing new. You just would have... When they get Marlowe Wax back, as I have said, that is when we can see Fadil Diggs focus mostly on being a defensive end and rushing the passer. But for this game against Eli Holstein, that will not be the case in all likelihood. He's going to have to be a defensive end, quarterback spy, and be a linebacker for this defense without Marlowe Wax. It would have been great, obviously, to have Marlowe Wax back for this game. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case, and Syracuse football is going to have to find a way to have a somewhat solid defensive performance in shutting down this high-powered Pitt team without it. They're going to have to do it. Every team has injuries. It sucks. We were hoping that we would have Marlowe Wax back for this game. That's not going to happen, though. We'll see how this Syracuse defense responds on Thursday night on the road against Pitt. So that's a little bit of a negative start with, unfortunately, Marlowe Wax not being back. But I promise you, there's some good news coming up because Syracuse football is getting back a starting corner for the Pitt game. We got some good news now for Syracuse football on defense. They are expected to have true freshman corner Marcellus Barnes back in the lineup against Pitt on Thursday night. Fran Brown said, quote, that he is ready to go. That is some awesome news for Syracuse's defense. For context, Marcellus Barnes, 4-star recruit entering the season. He was arguably Syracuse's best corner and one of their top defenders the first 2 games of the year, but he unfortunately suffered an injury in the first quarter against Stanford and has not been back since. Now, we thought, based on comments and what we were reading online, that Marcellus Barnes would be back for the NC State game before the bye week. And Barnes went through pregame warmups, but unfortunately, he did not dress for the game as I guess he wasn't deemed ready to play at that point. It happens. Thought he would be back. He was not, but Fran Brown did say, quote, he's ready to go for this game against Pitt. So don't come at me if he doesn't play. I think he's going to play, though, based on what Fran Brown did say to the media on Monday. Barnes is listed as a starting corner. Brown did say that he's going to have to compete for the role, but he's listed as a starting corner on the depth chart. Honestly, if he's healthy, fully healthy, ready to go, he's going to start. All right. Marcellus Barnes, arguably, once again, one of the best corners on the team prior to the injury. He was one of Syracuse's highest rated defenders, according to Pro Football Focus. And we saw that this coaching staff does trust Marcellus Barnes. It was evident in the Stanford game before he got hurt. Reason why we know this, remember Alec Iomanor, that talented wide receiver on Stanford who we talked all week about heading into that game, how he can beat you, and ultimately he did beat Syracuse, remember? Well, if you recall, in the very beginning stages of that game, the very beginning, think of like the first couple of drives, right? Before Iomanor caught a touchdown, before the 4th and 9 play that I hate talking about, there was one corner on Syracuse that was traveling with Iomanor at all times before he got hurt. And that corner was Marcellus Barnes. They trust him. They trust Marcellus Barnes at a very young age to be a productive corner for Syracuse against some of the top receivers in the conference. They do. Unfortunately, he got knocked out of the game, and that was before Iomanor caught a touchdown. That was before the 4th and 9 play. So it hurt Syracuse that he wasn't in the game. If he's in the game, you can make an argument they beat Stanford. right? You can make that argument, but again, injuries happen. You got to step up. Unfortunately, in that case, they did not. As far as for Pitt is concerned, because that's really the game that matters now, Pitt and getting Marcellus Barnes back. Here's what's good. Pitt has they have a great offense, but they have a very talented wide receiver in Konata Mumpfield, okay? Mumpfield leads Pitt in catches and yards, and I believe he's tied for the team lead in touchdowns as well, or receiving touchdown, that is, with 3. Mumpfield overall is 4th in the ACC in yards, and he is 4th in the ACC in yards per game. This is one of the more talented receivers in the ACC, all right? I'm not saying that Syracuse the entire game is going to line up Marcellus Barnes one-on-one with Mumpfield, okay? Not necessarily the case. But it does help that they get Barnes back. It obviously helps because at least throughout the game, they can stick a starting corner on him at all times. There's no reason really why a starting corner for Syracuse, unless unfortunately someone gets hurt, one of Lewis or Barnes again. We don't want that to happen. But as long as those two are on the field, there's no reason why one of them isn't on Mumpfield. At least you can throw multiple defenders at him, right? There shouldn't be a huge mismatch where Mumpfield's going up against a backup. That is the best part about having Marcellus Barnes back in the lineup. Could he travel with him? Maybe. They did that with Iomander before he got hurt. But in all likelihood, it's probably more of like one's going to play one side, one's going to play the other side, him and Lewis specifically, him and Clarence Lewis. And whatever side Mumpfield lines up on, that's the defender that's going to guard him. That's if they decide to play man, of course. If they play zone, well, that just complicates everything, right? But if they play man coverage, their top receiver in Mumpfield is going to see, in all likelihood, one of Clarence Lewis or Marcellus Barnes, which is good because that means he's not going up against a backup. So the good news for Syracuse football, Marcellus Barnes, a talented true freshman corner, a 4-star recruit heading into the season, has not played since the first quarter of the Stanford game, is ready to go, according to Fran Brown, for Pitt on Thursday night. Huge addition for this defense, which, again, will be without Marlowe Wax. It's going to be all hands on deck against a talented Pitt offense. All right, so that does it, I believe, for most of the injury news, right? Marlowe Wax, Marcellus Barnes. Coming up, we'll talk about the Syracuse football offense, which, by and large part, remains status quo.